are these people?
Another example of neocolonialism at play is happening in Papua New Guinea. Um, so this is from Counterpunch, August 8th, about a place called Kwikrok, when the skies rained metallic death. And they're going to reference this documentary called Paradise Bombed, by a guy named Friendlyjordies. I don't know if people um, know that guy. He Australian YouTuber, has gotten his hands in some political stuff from time to time, does some comedic takes on that. Had his house firebombed not that long ago, because of takes on, like we're about to hear. He recently did a thing on Assange that people should go watch, but I've put the link to that documentary in the description below. It's about 45 minutes. I have some parts from it and this article summarizing, but I think people should actually watch the entire thing. It's very good. I made Collin watch it last night, so hopefully we're versed enough. So it's called Paradise Bombed, and it's about what happened when burning metal death rained down on Kwikrok, one of the most remote places on Earth, in October 2021. First contact was made with some villages here in 2000. So we're in 2023, 23 years. We've had contact with modernity, right? So was made with some villages here in 2000 in the form of Chinese drones, Serbian mortars, French rockets, came just 21 years later to annihilate them. The Indonesian military attacks on Kwikrok, some 12 kilometers from occupied West Papua, border with independent Papua New Guinea, in dense rainforest and high mountains, are terrible enough to make anyone who doesn't have a heart of stone cry when watching this film. But even worse is knowing that they're just a small piece in a pattern of atrocities carried out by Indonesia with total impunity, because they're covered up and assisted by its allies in respectable democracies. I don't know if anyone watches survival shows, but Survivor Man's in Papua New Guinea, he was like, this is one of the hardest places to live in the world. Like, because of the mountainous rainforest terrain, it's ridiculous, right? Like finding food in that kind of environment is not easy. So that plays a part later, which is why I bring it up. So there's plenty of information available, but the atrocities are still happening. If you ask the essential questions of what, bombing, mortar rockets, M16 and sniper attacks, the where, Kwikrok, when, October of 2021, and how, modern weapons supplied by Indonesia's Western allies, the why, land grabbing for mines, oil palms, etc., and who, the last one, who, is the hardest and really upsetting one. In crimes like these, who usually refers to the victims, but rarely to the responsible who. Who? Christopher, where am I? Because they have all sorts of ways of covering up, the German philosophers Christoph Dimmerling and Hilge Landwehr, cited by Caitlin Emick in Against Hate, write that collective dispositions of hatred and contempt cannot subsist without the corresponding ideologies which represent the socially despised or hated persons as a social harm, a danger, or a threat. So similar to how our last story, where they called, what was it, Niger, were, part of the bad neighborhood, right?
Right.
So
That's another.
Yep. Indonesia blatantly.
It's only bad to kind of downplay the resources.
Yeah.
And I think that's on purpose, because it's the idea of like, it's kind of like if you mention something like the hood here, but there might be like, I don't know, like decent housing or whatever. But it's like, oh, we need to downplay, the gifts of a certain neighborhood, or in this case, a certain region, so we can secretly take their shit, but have like the masses believe, oh, this is probably this is probably not shit.
Right.
So won't think none the wiser. So that's on purpose to have people have this mentality of these countries of being like poor and nothing good is going to amount other than when actually underneath the surface there is.
And I
And
think the documentary goes on to talk about I think it was Roosevelt, right, who one of his advisors was this guy who owned a mining company essentially that is still working in Papua New Guinea, right, to enact this essentially peace talks where it was essentially strong arming Papua New Guinea to conform, you know,
Right.
similar to, I'm sure, Niger will have come up as well soon, right? So Indonesia blatantly represents the hated persons of West Papua as a social harm, standing in the way of development. Terrorists armed with bows and arrows who are threatening progress, the progress of who? In 1981, the Indonesian Army's Operation Clean Sweep against West Papua resistance to its UN-blessed military occupation used a slogan that clearly expressed its genocidal intent. Let the rats run into the jungle so that the chickens can breed in the coop. The rats were West Papuans, and the chickens, Indonesian trans migrants, who are used to create buffer zones and occupy the land in a way that is friendly to Indonesian intentions. I don't know where to find the appropriate language to write about this. It's too sickening and enraging for the words I know, even swear words, but I can detail some of the collective dispositions of hatred and contempt of the responsible who in this story, by which I mean what Western governments and transnational companies have been aiding, abetting, and tolerating for decades, and what the corresponding ideologies of neoliberalism, the widespread ignorance, indifference, and impotence are allowing. The first account is the personal experience of Benny Wenda, interim president of the United Liberation Movement for West Papua. In 1917 to 1978, attacks on the Bileam Valley of the Central Highlands, 4,146 people were murdered in aerial bombings and strafings of villages using American-supplied Bronco OV-10 planes. I'll read that again. 4,146 people were murdered with American planes, as well as in a wholesale shooting in 1977. Indonesian military aircraft bombed many Lani villages in the highlands, including Benny's village. Benny remembers an attack where their huts and crops were burned, and many his family were killed or injured. Between 1917 and 1983, Benny and his family, along with thousands of other Highlanders, lived in hiding in the jungle. Violence from the military remained a constant threat. In one particularly harrowing incident, soldiers happened to cross Benny's family in the jungle. The soldiers ripped Benny's 2-year-old cousin from his auntie's arms and threw her to the ground with so much force that the child's back was broken. Then they raped his auntie, forcing Benny to watch. His small cousin died 2 weeks after the attack, his auntie sometime later from her own injuries. In West Papua, sexual violence and torture are favored forms of dehumanization. The Asian Human Rights Commission reports that in the same period, people were tortured with hot bayonets. Village leaders in Tiam were sliced with razors. Civilians were beaten with axes, and some others were buried alive. A tribal leader named Nalakun Kibak was slaughtered, and his blood was kept in a bucket. Lieutenant Colonial Sokemi, who was a military commander from Nabier, later forced the other tribal leaders, teachers, and priests to drink the blood at gunpoint. Some of the arrested individuals were forced to get into big barrels filled with water and locked there until they drowned. Some of those arrests were thrown into wells while still alive, and those wells were later covered with soil. These reports have been available for years, but no action against the perpetrators have been taken. No action against the Indonesians' military enablers who just kept on enabling them because no one seems to care enough to stop them. Kwikrok in the Pinggyungang Bintang Mountains Regency nearly presented with its official link as a normal place. just another district in Papua province, and not, of course, in what is really occupied West Papua, of 476.4 kilometers, had a population of 1,942 people in the 2010 census. If not yet dead, they're all hiding in the mountains now. So who are the victims? They're the next-speaking customary owners of the land, the Nagalam Kupal people, who have a nature of revering subsistence economy, of carefully rotational slash-and-burn agriculture, food gardens, pigs, chickens, hunting, and gathering of wild food and medicines. Sounds like a alright life. Linguistically, they're closely affiliated with the Min people near Tumlabil in New Guinea, but colonialism separated them with its cruel border that respects nothing of people and natural setting. Their cosmology is ethical, attuned to sustaining the balance of nature in a universe with the god Atanki as the utmost creator for the Nagalam Kupal. Their traditional customs and beliefs are essential to every aspect of their lives, things like building a house, marrying, or repairing a construction, all of which follow time-honored rituals. This respect for and attachment to their land and their culture makes them enemies of military men who want to dig up everything and poison it for gold, or devastate it with oil palm plantations. In protecting this biodiverse land, and by extension the whole planet, Nagalam Kupal became terrorists that must be exterminated. They literally called them rats, right? So, in September 2021, there were reports in the Indonesian media that members of the so-called KKB, the armed criminal group, in reality the Free Papua movement, the OPM we talked about earlier, attacked a Kwikrok health facility, upon which a nurse ran away and fell into a ravine. According to officials cited by the Indonesian news agency Antara, the health worker died after being tortured by the terrorists. Unsurprisingly, the terrorist-ridden claims of the story are respectfully echoed abroad in, for example, the new China news agency Xinhua, which affirms that armed criminals burned a health clinic in late April. The Indonesian government declared armed criminal groups in Papua and West Papua provinces as terrorists for inciting violence and being separatists to the country's sovereignty. Not to be outdone in buddy-buddying Indonesia, the West Australian reports Kwikrok was the scene of arson attacks by rebels. The West Papua National Liberation Army claimed responsibility for the attack on the public facilities. The Indonesian government designated separatist insurgents as terrorists in April. So we got a couple of world powers going along with this story that's obviously been fabricated, right? So fake news conducted by Indonesian military men and their allies is part of the same old story. An investigation by the Papuan People's Assembly tells it differently, and given the familiar pattern, I would say accurately. One witness suggests that the first provocation from the side of the perps, and second, retaliation against their own crime attacks in Kwikrok, aim to drive the traditional owners from the land, which is being eyed for gold and copper mining as a kind of extension to the OK Teddy mine just across the border in Papua New Guinea. Indonesian human rights defenders describe links between such actions of Indonesian military forces, retired police and military men, now government ministers who are trying to expand mining operations. The September attack on the held southern Kwikrok involved a group associated with the former regent, Kostan Otemka, who, during his tenure from 2016 to 21, encouraged mining exploration by Indonesian government company PT Anaka Tambang, Synergy, with the Army on improving security and Mind ID. There are names of retired and incumbent security force members such as Mr. Doni Monardo and Mr. Muhammad Munir, who is still holding the position as the head of Strategic Analysis Board of Indonesian State Intelligence Agency. So we're having their form of the CIA involved. One mineral exploration site presently being eyed is Gunung Antaros, located between Kwikrok and the PNG border in the Sepik River catchment. This corroborates the findings of Bini Winda and what any long-term Indonesian watcher has seen before, which is that the Indonesian government is creating violence and chaos to feed these troops, as the head of the Indonesian parliament, Bambang Susatyo, ordered Destroy them first. We will discuss human rights matters later. What the fuck, Care Bear? Like, could you imagine any Russian or Chinese saying words like that? Like,
well, given what I could with China, honestly, but I think that will downplay it.
yeah,
No, with China, I said China. Not with Russia though.
no.
Like,
So,
it,
yeah, I mean,
yeah, as we said in the last segment, at
yep,
least publicly,
yep.
there is a mutual respect,
They'll at least lie
or at
to your
least some
face.
respect, right?
Yeah, which this
You
is
know,
just
or
like,
like for the global,
we're gonna kill them first, and then whatever human rights after we'll deal with.
right?
So the documentary Paradise Bond begins with goose-stepping Indonesian soldiers, a first display of how uncertain the government's legitimacy is when goose-stepping signals more about domestic repression than protecting citizens from foreign attacks. It then describes the attacks almost a month after the health center incident. There are images of unexploded bombs. Witnesses counted 152 drones. The people were busy with everyday tasks. They heard the helicopters and ran to hide in the mountains. Rockets were shot from 4 to 5 helicopters, mortars fired from drones, and there were soldiers with M16 and sniper rifles. They attacked houses, food gardens, pigs, and chickens with bombs and rockets. Helicopters were shooting rockets at civilians. Those who couldn't run into the mountains to hide were killed by rockets and mortars. Some 13 people, mainly children and the elderly, one woman who had 2 small children, she got 2 kids, so the kids were grabbed and killed. She was shot by M16. Those who survived the attack are now trying to stay alive in the extreme conditions of the Star Mountains, one of the rainiest places on Earth. At least 200 are known to have died from starvation, but the displaced people are scattered in remote places, so many more than that would have died. They can't return to their villages because they've been guarded by Indonesian snipers since the attack, and the tracks are booby-trapped. People trying to return have been murdered, tortured, starvation, sickness, sniper, M16, mortared, rocket booby-trapped. Foreign interests have brought grief, displacement, suffering, and death to Kwikrok. So I wanted to play this because I'm not sure how much China is involved, but it seems like to some degree their military industrial complex might be involved, as well as Australia's in the West here.
Were fired and dropped by drone.
So they're going to talk about the drones that they mentioned a second ago. Let me full screen this. Here we go. Nope. Here.
Were fired and dropped by drone.
Drone.
Yeah.
I asked the witnesses to draw the drones that dropped the mortars. The 2 witnesses that could independently came back with strikingly similar pictures.
Now, what did that picture look like to you?
Helicopter.
At first, I thought
Right. Looks like a helicopter at first, but wait, there's more.
there was confusion and the witnesses were drawing helicopters, but they reassured me that these were small drones dropping mortars.
Oh,
Which ones, though, you think?
This picture from 2021 shows an Indonesian soldier in Papua, seemingly from BRIMOB, the Mobile Brigade
look
Corps,
about right.
standing next to a drone model almost identical to what the witnesses drew. We've identified the drone pictured as a Xi'an Blowfish A3, a Chinese model that boasts of a swarm function, where 10 drones swarm a target in unison, utilizing...
Now, we've talked about AI drone swarms
Yeah.
before, yes?
yes.
So, yeah. You know, I mean, I try to warn people. I try.
artificial intelligence to take off and attack a target with full autonomy. This is the very cutting edge of modern warfare. You wouldn't have much luck defending yourself from these with bows and arrows.
That's what they're capable of doing.
Right. We've talked about this, and like people need to be more concerned about AI than I think because I think we're hearing a lot of AI in terms of the media industry,
Yes.
like entertainment.
Mhm.
We're not talking about AI in terms of war.
No.
We have the technology already to do that, and that's way more concerning compared to
By far.
having an AI-based movie or having an artist. You're able to create a song done by an artist that might be dead via AI. This is, a lot more concerning, or should be more concerning.
Airburst anti-personnel round dropped from AI drone. You think is a bad idea, Collin? Yeah, probably. The other thing to mention with this is that they modified these mortar rounds. Okay, so if we go back to them dropping them, if I can,
target with full autonomy. This is the
so see there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're using mortar rounds, which normally you drop into a mortar and it shoots that way, right? Big arcing things. Okay. They modified these to normally the mortar round wouldn't have tail fins. They added those. Okay. They also added a much larger and easier to engage trigger essentially on the cone of the mortar, right?
Right.
Where essentially it was solely designed to be activated by softer roofing materials such as like sago palm, which is like what is used for like huts here,
Right.
So I mean they definitely thought about killing these specific people with these,
right?
So
the very cutting edge of modern warfare. You wouldn't have much.
We've also seen this in Ukraine to no end, by the way. Drone warfare is insane over there.
Like defending yourself from these with bows and arrows. This man is removing parts of mortars dropped by a drone that got stuck in a roof. After you were bombed, did you went and collected these? Where did you find these ones?
This one. Yes, bomb is dropped everywhere, garden, village, and etc.
Was it dropped from a helicopter or from a drone?
It's thrown from a drone.
Drone. So this one's from a drone, goes down like that, and it's like the green one we saw yesterday, and then this one. Is this one come from a helicopter or?
Yes. Drone by the Bihari. This from helicopter. Yes.
Were they shooting rockets at civilians?
No.
Civilians.
Yes.
We hear that those who couldn't run into the mountains to hide, mostly the young and the elderly, were the ones killed by the rockets and mortars.
Bilha was killed by bomb dropped.
And who was Bilha?
His sister's daughter.
And how old was Bilha?
4 years.
4 years old. And where was Bilha when the bomb was dropped?
She cannot run away, so she's baby and she cannot run away. So while managing to run away, bomb dropped and killed.
Killed her.
Yep. All people unable to run away into the bushes to hide themselves were bombed and killed. Yes.
And they died from not being able to eat food? No, they were bombed. They were bombed.
They were bombed.
Those who didn't die in the attack still had to survive being dispossessed without food or shelter in the Star Mountains, a place thought to be one of the rainiest on Earth. This footage shows the journey to relative safety the residents of Kwikrok had to make.
But yeah, I mean,
They were in the bush. They stayed in the bush till now.
Till now.
so we'll come back to those rocket parts that they were talking about in a
Fired
minute.
and
But the article continues a bit. Anything you got to say on that before we continue?
I mean, I said it, just right. Once again, global south. Once again, I think it's significant. At least you can make the argument that people are familiar with Africa, and maybe a couple of countries within the continent like this. This is a remote place in Papua New Guinea. No one's heard of this place.
No one can even. It's literally you have to fly in. Like, there's no way, you can't get to it any other way.
Right. And you would figure, like, of all places in the world, that this would be the least likely way you're going to have military warfare like this. But of course, the same issue. They have resources that imperialists want. So we got to get rid of the civilians. And a lot of their, their lines of defense are not going to be able to stand with
they
AI
got
drones.
Bows and arrows, bro.
And arrows.
I know Avatar was like super good, but that's not how it works. M60 versus like a bow and arrow just doesn't the Zulu at least had numbers against the Gatling guns, Right. This is like guerrilla shit that they're hoping will. So anyway, China's not alone in this. So the drones were Blowfish A3 UAVs, a Chinese model with an intelligent swarm function. 10 AI-controlled drones swarm a target in unison. Fragments that have been found reveal that the mortars were made by the state-owned Serbian company Kwikrok in 2020 and are specifically designed to be dropped from aircraft rather than fired from a mortar barrel and to affect a much larger surface, as well as being modified to explode when they hit a much softer target than usual, for example, a house with a sago leaf roof or a human. The Thales F-768 rockets, or Thales, I think, have a warhead designed to explode into 8,000 effective splinters, covering a circle of 132 square meters and killing everything within it. It's steel rain, Collin. That's what that is. So, this guy we're about to see, Stephen Loosely, is Thales Australian deputy chairman, and we're gonna see what odious excuses he has for this shit.
Is the deputy chair of Thales Australia, the closest subsidiary of Thales to West Papua. But if we are arming them, how do we prevent these states that don't have robust institutions?
How are we arming them, and to whom are we referring?
I've got an example here. Do you know what this is?
Looks like part of a spent round.
Yes. Do you know what type of round this is?
No, 7.62, something like that.
No, this is a Thales-made FZ-68 that I retrieved in around Kwikrok in Indonesian occupied Papua. It was used on civilians there. I've got some pictures.
Well, I'm not familiar with this, so it's difficult for me to comment.
Yeah. So this is a village in October 2021, a civilian village that the Indonesian army went in and basically blew to the floor with Thales-made weapons, and this is part of it. How are we ensuring that?
Well, that's an assertion, but I am unaware of any of this. So it's something that you would need to be asking Indonesian authorities and the relevant Australian authorities. This is not something that has come through my wheelhouse.
But aren't you not an executive director
No, I'm the Deputy Chair of TALIS Australia. We do not export these kinds of capabilities, insofar as I'm aware, to Indonesia.
But is it not your responsibility to
No, it's
ensure?
not.
It's not. So this is another piece of it.
This is something that should be directed to TALIS Group in Paris, if it's true.
So, I know that they did contact them and received no response. They also contacted like every other organization this guy tried to like pass the buck to. No response from them either. So, but yeah, like Tails also, he also instructed him to talk to Tails France. Now, where do you think those French rockets might end up elsewhere? We just talked about this earlier. You know,
I mean,
like
Ukraine.
Yep.
Like anywhere really in the global south where
Yep.
there are resources that the colonizers want.
This little Bushmaster that Thales has as well. It's like a big armored truck, right? He talked about that like Ukraine was one of their biggest buyers, you know? So like in that video. But the documentary shows an interview with the deputy chair of Thales Australia, Stephen Loosely, who, shown the fragments of the Thales rocket, purses his lips in annoyance and claims, "I'm not familiar with this, so it's clearly not for me to comment." In fact, Loosely, a former Labour senator, is very familiar with many secrets of the Australian weapons establishment as, for example, inaugural chairman of the Woomera Prohibited Area, the world's largest land-based weapons testing range where, surprise, surprise, Thales Bushmaster and Hawkeye armored vehicles were tested. Watching Loosely, the human embodiment of the trade he represents, made me want to throw up. I don't have publishable words of my own to describe this loathsomeness, so I'll borrow from Shakespeare in the form of Henry the Fourth, the Eighth, one of those, fourth, yeah,
Fourth,
V-1, right? He's an obscene, greasy tallow catch who can sit in his antiseptic office, smirking as he claims that these vehicles that mow down demonstrators in West Papua are designed for protecting people, for carrying people. In his trade, there are plenty as bad or even worse people willing to kill the Neocolonialism Kupel or test their nuclear weapons, with all the consequences, their sacred aboriginal land at Woomera, but who feel offended in their respectability when a journalist like filmmaker Christo Lanker bears evidence. In its presentation, Thales is greener, and it's building a future we can all trust. In the video, they had like one of their advertising videos, you know, like nice inspirational music with things like they're green and for a better future, right? So the future Thales is building is actually the one presently being destroyed, as shown to us by the climate catastrophe, which is largely caused by devastation of habitats like the rainforest of Kwikrok. The shameless lie hidden in Thales' greener claim is a measure of the absence of moral standards in the Western culture it represents. Among the trusting, we, the all which excludes people like the ethically oriented Neocolonialism Kupel, perhaps the biggest and at least the most perverse lie is what the company calls itself. It's named after one of the seven sages, Thales, a founding figure of ancient Greece, credited with the formulating the advice, "Know thyself," which is inscribed on the temple at Delphi, dedicated to Apollo by the Pelagians, who believed that this god of sun and healing protected them from plague and invasion. Know thyself, according to the weapons manufacturer, is embodied by a turd of a sneering man who knows nothing about the death-dealing products he deals in. With all the know-nothing respectability of a pale blue shirt, spotted tie, which he carefully straightens before being shown photos of the bombing raids and assertion, he says, and seated at a pristine table in a business office of a moribund society. Which we are we with? In 1941, Hannah Arendt wrote, You can only defend yourself as the person you're attached to. She was referring to the question of a Jewish army. But there's a lot more substance here than the apparently limited concern of the statement. Who are the West Papuans being attacked as, in their experience, they're defending themselves as West Papuans, as the defenders of their identity, their cosmology, their way of life, their rainforests, mountains, and rivers, but the attack responsible, who that calls them rats, monkeys, nobodies, and the soldiers wearing weapons, the looseleys in suits, and everyone, the supposed we, from whom Thales is claiming trust, behind collective dispositions of hatred and contempt that allow West Papuans to be treated like vermin, the definition that one who has imposed on another who. And to go back to Shakespeare, now to the Merry Wives of Windsor, what the who of Western democracies are aiding and abetting in West Papua is the rankest compound of villainous smell that ever offended nostril. Yet, at least in words, if the appeal is to people who hate this stench, who don't want to pretend that it smells like roses of civilization, the remedy is simple. An anonymous eyewitness victim of the attack says, "The manufacturer of this bomb, I suggest, please, you put a stop to them. Stop making the bomb." But first, we need to heed the original Thales and what Aristotle called the beginning of all wisdom. Know thyself, and know who we are as an expression of what we are tolerating, close up or at a distance. Care Bear, thoughts?
Just more of the same shit, except, as I said earlier, this is a very extremely obscure because I never heard of these people before. It's always kind of, again, it's colonization of a different sense in a way, but this is almost kind of reminiscent to, the Native Americans here. This is kind of what
Palestinians in Israel,
so
Africans in Africa, South Americans in South America.
The only difference is, it's like here, it's at least you can make the argument that Palestinians are fighting back.
Yeah.
Africans are beginning to fight, but like the global South, for the most part, is beginning to recognize the issues. And not to say they have the means, but I think they have the willingness to fight back, given the history. This is in Indonesia, so these are more isolated islands, so they don't necessarily have the kind of cultural bonding, I would say, that a lot of these other regions in different parts of the world have, in a way that they're able to come in solidarity. Not to say they can't, but they're just so small. And then, these are more naturalist communities. So it's very much, we fish, we hunt, we cut trees. That's our life. We're not industrialized in any way.
Right.
Well, you can argue most of the global South isn't either, but there is some aspects of industry in those countries, many of those countries, that these areas don't.
Yeah.
And the only way they can defend themselves is essentially a bow and arrow, or run, or flee into the mountains or the hills.
Take the white man's gun, which they are more than willing to do.
Right.
In
order to, not even to defend themselves, it's just the idea of just surviving, which is really, it sucks.
Yeah.
But it just gives more of a light to the situation of how colonialism, even like in this part of the world, down under, more or less, is happening there too. And so it's just more in the same shit than just a different version of it.
Yep.